I would like to invite Mr. Jie Yu Koh to make a presentation on your topic. Yes, please.
All right, good morning, everyone. I've taken note of the time. My presentation will take 15 minutes. It will not be very long, but there are not many words on my slides. So I hope you would, it will be done in English, because even though I've lived in Cambodia for 5 years, I could understand a bit, but I have no ability to make a presentation in a language that I'm not familiar with. So if you need a translation, if you need to listen to the translation, please put it on. It will be in English, and I'll keep it really short and interesting for everyone. So the presentation, I want to start with what is decent work. At the ILO, we mentioned about decent work, and here in this panel, we talk about how formalization and social protection can help Cambodia achieve decent work. But what is decent work? Now, the decent work has a few definitions and a few things that needs to look, but we'll put it down into really made 4 big pillars, and I've broken them down to a few key criteria or key things that needs to be guaranteed and ensured for when we talk about decent work. What are they? Well, the first is opportunities for work that is productive and delivers a fair income. Now, we would not consider a work to be decent if there is no wages being paid, or the wages paid is below subsistence, that the person is unable to live a life with the wages that is being provided. What also constitutes decent work? Safety and security in the workplace. We want all our workers to be able to go to work in the day, and in the evening, or when they end work, to be able to go home safely to meet their families, to be with their families. So a safe and secure workplace is part of decent work. Of course, I'm here on social protection, and social protection is a fundamental part on social security. Social protection is a fundamental part of decent work. The decent work should provide social security for all these workers. There are also other, sometimes we say softer requirements of decent work, but equally important. This decent work should be able to provide workers with better prospect for personal development, for social integration. It should also allow the workers the ability to express their concerns, organize themselves, and participate in decisions that affect their lives. Last but not least, decent work should ensure that there is equality of opportunity and treatment for all women and men. So we spoke a little bit about decent work, but what is social protection and social security? I will use these 2 words interchangeably, because in international ILO literature, these 2 words are seen the same. But here in Cambodia, it's a little bit different, and I'm using the definition from the Cambodia's National Social Protection Policy Framework 2016-2025, which defines social security as schemes established to provide protection and to improve the capacity of Cambodian citizens to effectively deal with economic risks and other vulnerabilities from the changes of living and working conditions. What do we mean by the changes of living and working conditions? Well, this is one of the graphs that we like to use on social security and social protection. On the y-axis is the income, and on the x-axis is, well, as you age. So many people, when we first started out, before you're 15, before you're 18, you're studying, and some lucky kids may have an income from generous parents' allowance, or they work during the holidays, but most of them wouldn't have a very substantial income. And then once they graduate and leave school, they start working, and that's where they start having some income. But this income is not constant. You will increase your income as you pick up more skills, you pick up more experience, but your income may also drop because you suffer from a work accident, because you have to take on maternity leave, and eventually we all grow old and we are unable to be as efficient, effective at work, and we might want to retire and we have no income. So the purpose of Social Security is always to what we call to create income smoothing, to ensure that regardless of what is your living and working condition, you would have a certain level of income to sustain your livelihoods. So I'm going to run through, because I want to keep my time to 15 minutes. I'm not going to run through this. I think maybe the organizers, MLVT, will share with you the slides. But for workers, there are significant impact of Social Security, social protection. It provides them greater protection during income shortfalls. It actually increases labor mobility. It provides for old age. And there is also greater predictability about healthcare spending. At an individual, at a household level, it helps to prevent catastrophic loss of productive capital. It helps people accumulate productive assets, increases innovation, risk-taking, especially in livelihood for poor households, and it is overall an investment in human capital and improved labor participation rate. At an enterprise level, there has been evidence to show that increasing Social Security increases workers' retention. Research has also shown that there are some meso impacts on enterprises, where increase in Social Security coverage leads to increased workers' revenue and a profit and increased productivity. At a national level, increasing social protection, Social Security facilitate economic reforms, enhance social cohesion, and reduce inequalities, and enhance human capital. So we cover half of the house, which is Social Security, social protection. What about formalization? What are we referring to in terms of formalization? And here, there's two pieces of, I would say, landmark documents. The first on the left was a joint work between ILO and UNDP on the understanding the path to formalization and integrated vision. And on the right, I don't read Khmer, but if I'm correct, it reads the National Strategy for the Informal Economic Development, which is a guiding document from the Ministry of Economy and Finance on how to formalize the Cambodian economy. So what is informality? We talk about informalization. What is informality? I think there is a definition of informality, and here it's written. It is a very simple definition. Informality is the absence of formality. What does this mean? Basically, if you're not formal, you're informal. All right? So it can exist in different sectors, and that's where I want to emphasize on, and where an economic unit or a worker is not formal. So what do we mean? Well, first, informality can exist in different sectors. We sometimes hear in Cambodia, people say, oh, I'm from the agriculture sector, I'm informal. That's not true. There's no such thing as agriculture is an informal sector. If you go to Australia, if you go to China, much of the agriculture sector is highly formal. In fact, one of the biggest agriculture producers in the world is the US, and every US agriculture producer is heavily formalized because they are regulated by the Food and Drugs Authority. Now, the economic unit can also be formal or informal. You know, there are the economic units such as businesses, enterprise, establishments, to micro enterprises, self-employed. They can be formal or informal. Just because you are self-employed, you're a micro enterprise, or you are a family-run business, doesn't mean that you are an informal business. Some of the biggest businesses in the world are family run. So they are very, very formal, very, very structured. Lastly, a worker can also be formal or informal. It depends. Whether the worker is formal or formal doesn't depend on the economic sector, but depends on whether the worker have access to social protection, have access to decent work, entitlement to employment benefits, and etc. So this is an important graph that I want to put it out. This is a scatter plot that shows the level of percentage of informal employment versus GDP per capita. So you can see from the top left corner, there is a huge clusters of countries. Each dot is a country where informal employment is at a high 80-90% of the economy. And you can also see that their GDP per capita is below the 10,000 mark, around the 1,000 to 2,000 US dollars GDP per capita. And as you move down to more developed countries where there is higher GDP per capita, you notice that there is a relationship with the informal employment, and informal employment decreases. So where is Cambodia? This red dot here that I put in is roughly where Cambodia stands, at about 88% informal employment, and at about 1,700, 1,800 GDP, US dollars GDP per capita. Where is the aspiration? This is the middle income, which is about 4,500 US dollars, 3,800 US dollars, where we put a benchmark. If you look at where the green line intersects with the curve, that roughly puts at the informal employment at about 60% of the economy, of all employment. What about high-income countries? This is the threshold for high-income countries at about 13,000 US dollars. And you will see that informal employment in high-income countries are usually around 40% of the total employment. Even with some exceptional outliers, you would see, if you go further down the curve, none of the high-income countries have more than 60% of informal employment. So what's the lesson and what's the message here? Now, if Cambodia wants to achieve its objective of becoming a middle-income country, of becoming a high-income country by 2050, formalization, tackling the informal economy is absolutely necessary, because we would not see Cambodia hitting the high-income, middle-income, high-income countries if informality stays this high. So how do we address informality? I notice I'm a little bit short on time. I have a few examples. I've hidden them. When we share the slides, you can look at it where we have different country examples. But the big four approaches are quite consistent across all countries. First, make it easier to register and comply, making it more attractive to formalize, making it more feasible to formalize, and making it less attractive to be informal. Most of these strategies and approaches will fit into one of these boxes. So we look into the National Strategy for Informal Economic Development and also in the integrated formalization approach, and there are a few key recommendations that can be considered for implementation in the next few years. I will want to go through a few of them in detail because I think they are really important. First is perhaps looking at from the South America, Latin America experience, establishing kind of a mono-tax system, including defining a tax-exempted income for small enterprises when annual income is below the minimum threshold. I'm very pleased to report that Cambodia has done half of this. They have not established a mono-tax system, but the Prime Minister has made it really clear that all enterprises with annual turnover less than 250 million will be tax exempted. So this is a really good step because this has already guaranteed and assured many micro, small, medium enterprises that they can formalize, register without the worry that they be put on additional tax burden as long as they don't have an annual turnover more than 250 million reals. The second point I want to emphasize actually here is the building of a culture of reporting and compliance, waiving fees for registration and reporting of income, and introduction of fines for non-compliance. This is something that I find it very unique, not unique, a very strange system here in Cambodia. In Cambodia, we are kind of encouraging a lot of the former firms to report and make a report. And when they do something wrong, we penalize them for it. But we are not doing anything to the firms, to the companies who are not reporting anything. If I were to give you an example, this is like the school teacher setting up a homework for every student. And the students who submitted their homework but make a mistake in their homework get scolded upon, and the teacher points out to them and say, "No, you submitted the wrong answer, this is bad." But this teacher doesn't do anything to all the other students who didn't submit their homework. This is not the kind of culture we want to encourage. We want to foster an environment and culture where students, companies are encouraged to report, to submit their reports, to submit their report. And if they make mistakes, well, we tell them where to improve. But we go after the people or the companies, we go after the students who don't submit their homework. The last one I want to mention as a recommendation, and I also wanted to note that the Cambodian government has already started doing, is to systemize, consolidate a lot of these services for former registered micro, small enterprise to make the incentive for formalization even higher. So I want to go to the last part of my presentation, and I want to leave you first with a big question. Is there decent work in Cambodia? Does these workers have access to social security? Well, in this picture here, we have construction workers, and based on the last labor force survey, 98% of all workers in the construction sector are informal. Do we know if they have decent work? Do we know if they could work, have enough wages, that they can work in a safe and secure environment? The correct answer here is we don't know. We don't know not because we don't know anything exactly, but we do not have enough evidence. We do not have enough companies, we don't have enough workers, we don't have enough data to ascertain if decent work conditions are being met in the industry. And we may have to consider how do we formalize the industry to ensure that these workers get decent work. Now, before I go on to another sector, I have a scene, a photo that I see rather, well, in various degrees here in Cambodia. If you go during the daytime in Phnom Penh, most likely you will not see anyone riding the motorbike without a helmet. But once you go out of Phnom Penh, when you go out to the province, you would see many people riding without a motorbike, without a helmet. And if you do travel at night in Phnom Penh, you will also see many of this, I would say, young kids, youth, riding the motorcycle in high speed without wearing a helmet. So we have a few theories in this photo. Why is this person in this picture not wearing a helmet? Well, there are a few hypotheses that we can guess. Now, first, he's not aware of the law that helmets are needed when riding motorcycles. This might be true. All right? This might be true. And this is the same for many workers in different industries. They may not. We have the labor law. We have the social security law. We have the OSH law. But do our workers, do our companies, do our enterprises, are they aware of this law? Are they aware of their obligations? Are they aware of what they need to do in this, with regards to this law? Now, if they are not aware, how would they comply and how would they be able to act on it? So there is also a second hypothesis that he is actually aware of the law, but he thinks that this doesn't apply to him. He's a Superman. His head will not, if he gets an accident, nothing will happen to him. And this is also something we might observe here in Cambodia. There are enterprises in certain sectors, in different sectors, who will tell you that, there is the labor law that stipulates, there's a wage law that stipulates certain criteria, there's a labor law that stipulates certain criteria, but we are informal. We are in an informal sector, we are an informal enterprise. This law doesn't apply to us. Really? Is this how the law has been stated? Well, we need more education. We need to let people who think that the law doesn't apply to him, wearing a helmet doesn't apply to him, know that wearing a helmet is important. It applies to him. The law applies equally to everyone. Now, there is also a third hypothesis. He's aware of the law. He thinks he knows the law applies to him, but he's not convinced. He thinks that this helmet doesn't protect him at all. It's not effective. So this is the same thing that we need to do with many of these enterprises when it comes to formalization. We need to make sure that they look at what's stipulated in the law, what's stipulated in terms of the OSH, in terms of social security, as something that is actually useful, helpful, and gives benefits and deliver benefits. This is also a reason why, in terms of formalization, there's a lot of discussion on what are the carrots, what are the incentives that can be put in place. Because we want to convince businesses, workers, self-employed people, micro, small, medium enterprises that formalization is good for you, good for the economy, good for your workers. The fourth reason could be he knows he wants to have formalized. But he doesn't. He wants to wear a helmet, but he doesn't have a helmet. Right? He doesn't own actually a helmet. So this is the same for a lot of questions on formalization. How can the government assist these enterprises who want to formalize to formalize? And then that comes in with reducing administrative barriers, reducing processes, so that it's easier to formalize. There is, of course, a last reason. I kind of put it at the bottom, it may be hidden, I'm not sure if you see it, but it reads there's no police on the street. I always think that this is one key hypothesis because in the evening, I always see more people without helmets in the evening in Phnom Penh than during the daytime. And in the evening, the police are not on the street. So we do have to think a little bit about how we can ensure compliance, how we can do to make sure that people who have a helmet are not hanging their helmet on their motorbike, but wearing it on their head when they're riding. So I go back to the next question. The same question that we look. Is there decent work in Cambodia? Does these workers have access to social security? And here is an image of a photo from one of the many garment factories here in Cambodia. Do they have decent work? Do they have security, social security? Well, my answer to this is I can't be certain, but what I'm certain is they are more likely to have social security. Majority of them would have made decent work conditions. And the reason being is the government sector is one of the more formalized sectors. Well, there are pockets that are still informal. There are pockets where there might be some decent work deficits. But by and large, most of the company sectors in this sector are at least reporting and making an effort to share data and share reporting on working conditions and on work employment. So we do know that more of these workers in this sector have decent work and have access to social security. So my last slide, formalization is key to achieving decent work in Cambodia. To achieve the ambition of becoming an upper middle income country by 2030, a high income country by 2050, formalization of the Cambodian economy is fundamental. Formalization will support the growth of micro small enterprises, job creation, and extend coverage of social security. It will also increase the competitive diversification and resilience of the economy. So by pushing for greater formalization, governments can have greater oversight over the application of labor laws and to design labor policies that can respond to the needs of the industry to support that quality economic growth. For businesses, they can have better, formalization presents better access to markets and responsive, effective support from government to improve profitability and productivity. For workers, formalization can realize their access to social security, fairly remunerated work, and a safe workplace. So with that, I end my presentation. I took a bit longer than what I wanted, but I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jie Yu Koh, for making the very detailed presentation on formalization and extension of social security scheme to achieve decent work in Cambodia.